We're looking at three things that just might sink YNW Melly's case for him. Now, week 2 of the murder trial has wrapped up and week 3 has just begun. And so far, the ball has been entirely in the prosecution's court, and they've been doing their best to take advantage of that. But have they succeeded? Well, it's been a mixed bag for sure. A lot of evidence has been produced and a lot of testimony has been given. But here, with me, with America's Attorney, we get straight to the point. So let's break down the 3 pieces of evidence that, in my opinion, could lead to a guilty verdict for YNW Melly. But I have to throw an asterisk here because he may walk out of the courthouse a free man. So stay tuned till the end for more on that. First up, we have footage of YNW Melly climbing into a gray Jeep at 2 in the morning with 2 victims and his co-defendant. They were all leaving the recording studio together after working on some music. And that's the last time that we see the gray Jeep before it pulls into the emergency entrance of the Memorial Miramar Hospital, sans Melly. The security footage is incriminating for multiple reasons. First, let's talk about what Melly is doing in the video while getting in the Jeep. It's really 2 things that matter. Number 1, he and Cortland Henry, who's also been charged with these murders, though he's not on trial yet, they get into the car on the driver's side. And this matters because according to crime scene investigators, damaging and even fatal shots were fired from inside the car on the left side of the car. And both victims were on the right side of the car. Second, in the video, he's playing with a cell phone. Now, as I will explain, the cell phone data is bad for Melly's chances for freedom. In the video, he's just seen playing with his phone. And not just any phone, but a phone that was, number 1, riding in the car with the victim's phone. Number 2, didn't travel with the victim's phone to the hospital after they were shot. 3, the same phone requested to a friend to be picked up near the murder scene by dropping a pin. And number 4, it was the same phone that was accessed by police using the passcode that Melly gave his mother while he was inside the jail following his arrest. Now, for Melly's part, his lawyers are saying that, hey, other people sometimes use the phone, and you can't tell which phone he's holding in his hand in the video. I don't think that's gonna cut it. The footage also proves without a doubt that Melly was, at least for a short period of time, in the car, aka the crime scene, with the victims shortly before their deaths. Now see, if we didn't have this footage, it would have been a lot easier for Melly to be able to claim that he left in a separate car, or that he stayed later at the studio, or that he left earlier. This footage provides exact timestamps of when Melly was with the victims. Now, this isn't foolproof evidence. Credible cases could be made saying that he was dropped off or picked up, etc., before any of the violence began. But I feel comfortable saying that this footage, combined with the second most damaging evidence, could sway the jury in the prosecution's favor. The second best, or worst, depending on who you ask, piece of evidence is the cell phone tower data. This mainly includes location data that was tracking several phones involved with the murders. According to the prosecution's expert, the data shows that Melly's phone, which we saw in the video was attached to his hand, was at the same location at the same time as the victims' phones, and that they traveled together. The cell phone data also showed the communications that took place at that time, a FaceTime call to Melly's girlfriend and a text message to a friend of Melly. So it does seem like it was Melly using the phone. So why is this ranked as number 2 as the incriminating evidence? Well, the security footage places him getting into the vehicle, but it doesn't show that he is the killer or even a killer. But the cell phone was in fact a repository for some deadly information, potentially. The phone contains a series of messages with Melly's mother in the weeks before the murder, in which he discusses a potential motive for the killings, which is the supposed disrespect of Melly's mother by at least one of the victims. And something far worse also, since motive is not like a necessary element to win the case. He asks his mother, this is Melly, asking his mother to buy him a .40 caliber weapon, the exact same type of weapon that was used to kill the victims. Now this has to be greatly troubling to Melly's lawyers. Generally speaking, it is a big W for the defense if the prosecutor doesn't have a weapon that can be tied to a defendant. But that big W becomes a small L for the defendant when there are messages with the defendant's mom in which he specifically asks her to buy me something that could definitely be the murder weapon. Wow. But let's not be shocked, right? I mean, Melly rose to fame not for being like super smart or cunning, but instead for thinking a lot about killing people. In the case that all of this is not yet a slam dunk, which it isn't, we have one final piece of evidence to unpack. The piece of evidence that I truly believe will be the final nail in Melly's coffin, his proverbial coffin, or actually, maybe his actual coffin, since the death penalty is on the table as a sentence. That nail, ladies and gentlemen, comes in the form of an Instagram DM. Yep. Social media strikes again. This piece of evidence has unfortunately still not been covered in depth by the prosecution yet, but if they can make the case that they claimed they could make 2 weeks ago in their opening statement, this Instagram DM is going to be close to irrefutable. I mean, it's a confession. Mostly. When news about the supposed drive-by broke, Melly was flooded with messages in which he was asked by friends if he was okay, if he survived the drive-by. Now, keep in mind, there was no drive-by. The bullets that killed the victims were fired from the driver's side of the car, from the inside of the car. There are certainly holes in the right side of the car that looked like a staged drive-by. They look like a drive-by. But those shots could not have hurt anyone because, according to the prosecutors, the investigators, and really to common sense, there was no one alive in the car when the right side of the doors were shot up. So what did Jamel Demons tell one of his friends when he was asked if he was injured in the drive-by? I did that. Shh. I was the shooter. I set it up. I was never in danger. My friends crossed me and I used a weapon I asked my mom to get me. And I killed them. I really do have murder on my mind. To be clear, I have Melly going to prison for these killings. I don't know whether he's gonna get the death penalty, although I wouldn't be surprised, but I wouldn't bet money on it. But I would bet on a conviction for him. And yet, it's not a done deal. And why is that? Well, not to pat me and my colleagues on the back here, but lawyers matter. Melly's lawyers are doing a pretty good job of throwing a little shade on the prosecutor's case, pointing out inconsistencies, etc. They're doing their job. But the real story, if Melly gets acquitted, may end up being the apparent incompetence of the prosecutor. Incompetence is a big word. Shortcomings? Her failed strategy decisions? Inartful handling of some witnesses? It's really hard to put it into one term, but let me point out a couple of flaws. So, the opening statement by the prosecutor should have read something like this. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is an odd murder prosecution. It's odd because the proof that we have of motive is so thin, and it's not very compelling. And we're missing the murder weapon. Perhaps no motive, perhaps no murder weapon. A bunch of circumstantial evidence. Well, why would I even bring this case? Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, here's why. Melly asked his mom to buy him a gun that matches the murder weapon. He traveled to the crime scene with the victims, and then he didn't go with them to the hospital. And when a friend asked him about the drive-by shooting that his other friend had falsely reported to the police, he admitted that no, in fact, he was the shooter. And then I would just use the rest of my opening statement to unpack that. But she didn't. Not at all. Her opening statement was nothing like that. And on top of that, the order of the witnesses that she's called has been confounding. Not compelling, confounding. And some of the witnesses seem like they were either not prepped for their testimony or they were prepped by someone who didn't have much of any trial experience. It's no secret that Melly's lawyers actually, and this is not hyperbole, they got a crime scene investigator to agree with Melly's lawyer that the investigator didn't know anything. Didn't know anything. What? Moreover, the witnesses who are providing incredibly damning information are not doing it in the best way. I mean, take this cell phone data analyst. His data is 100% reliable, but it's not pinpoint accurate. And by that I mean, the phones in question were traveling together, but together doesn't mean 4 feet apart. The phones could have been separated by 40 feet. The data presentation would have been the same. It would still be accurate, but the cell data doesn't show granular proximity. Instead, it shows sustained proximity during movement and in the context of a grid of streets and roads that precludes all conclusions except one, that Melly and the victims traveled to the crime scene together. But honestly, the analyst didn't testify very clearly about that. And then there's this mess of the DNA testimony. The lab technician actually testified that they were still running tests for DNA from the Jeep during the trial. During the trial? What? Who does that? That's so dumb. And not only that, but several DNA tests showed negative for Melly. But this is not a DNA case, clearly. And the judge ruled that the prosecutor was essentially cheating by trying to introduce lately acquired records. Oh man, it just has not been the prosecutor's finest hour. If Melly walks, I can tell you, some of the fingers are, gonna be pointing over there. But for now, we still have a bit left in this trial and we still have to hear from the defense side. So it's kind of a toss-up right now. But if you've been keeping up with this trial, and even if you haven't, I want to know your pro se opinion. Based on the information that we have received so far, what do you think the jury will decide? Guilty? Not guilty? Too soon to tell? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. And after that, do not go anywhere. Stay here because I've got more legal breakdowns right here that you should see.